tolerance allows groups to persecute whomever they fear are their enemies. What happens when thousands of innocent people die at the hands of a few, believing it is their duty and even more their destiny to destroy the supposed infidels? I could go on with these examples, and by no means are any of these manufactured. What can be infuriating is the groups that do such things are the first to cry foul when they think some right has been taken from them, with little thought about the rights they have been taken from their victims. Cults have no problem whatsoever in denying basic rights to their members, and their attempts to suppress the criticism of their detractors can become violent. They convince their followers that denial and self-sacrifice are for the good of the whole, and they ultimately will be rewarded, if not in this life, then in the next. The commitment and servitude would seem to be something to be admired, with one important exception. Because they believe they have been chosen and are the enlightened ones who will save the world and lead all others that are willing to the truth, they're also allowed to destroy all those that would stand in their paths. In addition, what is to be said about the issues of mind control, thought reform, or the more sensationalized term brainwashing? Groups would like to deny the existence of such overt manipulation by using experts to disclaim that they do not really exist and are only manufactured by the people who have something against the groups. These groups would have us believe their converts freely choose to become members, as mine did, without first giving the recruits enough information to make a fully informed decision. What some would say that even use of the word cult is a derogatory term, itself a buzzword, a label used by others to incite intolerance and hatred. A question, though, remains to be answered. If brainwashing is such a foreign concept, why are there over 1 billion people still under communist rule? Is it their passivity and acceptance of the communistic regime that because it has been such a wonderful experience, or because of fear of extermination? During the democratic uprising in China, there was placards of Mao Zedong being carried by the crowds. The masses believed then the current leaders had lost the vision of the founder of the Communist Party. Yet when the protesters were facing the barrels of the tanks, and the communist leaders subdued the movement and threw the protesters in jail, Mao Zedong's words, "The power of the people come through the barrel of a gun," were followed to the letter by the government. Even though demonstrators were holding to Mao as their example of uncorrupted leadership, the officials of the government were holding true to Mao's doctrine and methods of controlling its people. Not all cults are of religious origin. Some are political, others psychological, some are even social. We could also look into the issue of abusive situations as seen and see the same dynamics in them as the groups that number in the thousands. You can find some type of cult in virtually any area of life or interest. Religious cults incite strong reactions because of the abuse they get away with in the name of what they believe, claiming it is protected First Amendment right. And this describes the name of the present chapter. Using deception and mind control techniques, the cult have managed to create sub-societies in a democracy. It is more difficult in a democracy to maintain a totalitarian group because of the availability of information and alternative viewpoints. Cult leaders must work much harder to isolate their members from subversive information. In China, isolation is much easier to achieve because of the government's control of the media and education. coupled with the threat of physical harm or death if there is dissent from the government. China is only one example. You can find the same atmosphere in places like Cuba, Iran, North Korea, plus the terrorist organizations that are supported by different countries. Extremism runs rampant, spilling over to affect the rest of the world. The destruction of the World Trade Center, the bombing of the SS Cole, the suicide by the Sci-Fi Group in California, the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City, the murder of ATF agents, and the resulting fiery inferno that consumed lives in Waco, the mass murder-suicide of over 900 people in the jungle of Guyana, the terrorist attacks that are happening today in several different countries in the world by these terrorist organizations, all have the same thing in common. The leader and the members were perpetrators of the destruction and carnage in people's lives, consumed by the belief that they were right. They had the answers to salvation of humankind, and anyone or anything that stood in their way was evil and must be destroyed by any means possible. We are too quick to forget the atrocities that happened during the reign of Stalin and Hitler, the ethnic cleansing that took place in order to have a pure ideological society or a pure race. And I have to say that that's happening in countries today, in Africa and the Middle East. The effects are still being felt today in the forms of fascist groups, dictatorships, and countries still in the grip of communism. This is also true for the countries that support terrorist groups. They use or allow the same manipulations and fear tactics to gain converts and hold hostage their citizens. Cults in the United States, although they are afforded protection by our Constitution, would be the first to abolish that same Constitution if they ever came into power. They believe they have the ultimate way of ordering human existence, and therefore all forms of existence are inherently evil and false. For the protection of the elect, the group must destroy any alternative existence. Theirs is a black and white mentality where there is no room for gray. If power came into their hands, they would be able to silence their critics and have the power to keep them subdued by any means possible. They arrogantly proclaim that they have the truth, that they are the agents chosen to carry and protect that truth, no matter whom or what it destroys in the process. I would be remiss if I did not make this point. Cults are not made up of faceless masses. They are made up of human beings. These people have families, relatives, and friends. To label a group a cult is to attempt to label it something less than human. As I wrote before, using the label cult is a derogatory term. Yet for the sake of expediency, I use the term not forgetting their humanness, for I was once one of them as well. As we watch the burning of Koresh's compound, as we see the terrorist attacks with vans, with suicide vests, with knives, with guns, however it may be, do we think of the other hundreds of others, the families, the friends of those who died in the inferno, or the infernos, or the situations? They suffer in silence to this day, trying to make sense of the senseless searching for answers they may never be fully explained. To bring this chapter to the close, I would like to add a few more thoughts concerning the issues of mind control and deception. There are those who would deny the possibility of their existence. I'd like to give a grim reminder. Those that hijacked the planes on 9/11/2001 lived and worked in this country for a number of months before they carried out this travesty. They lived in communities and communicated with people. They had daily contact with others outside of, quote, their group and thinking. Yet when it came time, they were able to sacrifice themselves and thousands of others for their truth. It would take another book to look more fully into the elements of this control and manipulation. The subject is too extensive to be handled here. If I've made the reader think mind control is at least plausible, I feel I've been successful. I would make another point. As you can imagine, many people reading this manuscript before it went to print. One of the comments made I need to address. There was a feeling that because I was searching for God, this somehow made me vulnerable to get caught up in such a thing, and for that reason it was my own fault. To that I would say yes and no. The yes part is having closed myself off from the other opinions and thoughts that may have contradicted what the way was telling me was the truth. I could not entertain that there was something inherently wrong with the way's teachings. I would not listen to the thoughts and opinions of others. Truth will stand in the test of time and is willing to be challenged in the free marketplace of ideas. The no part is everyone has fallen prey to some type of manipulation, and all that it takes is for a person's interest to be captured, which covers many more areas than just religion. As I've stated before, any group could be turned into a cult, whether it is a personality cult, a political cult, psychological cult, or ideological cult. As we are in the infancy of a new millennium, I quote again those words that were on the sign above the throne of Jim Jones. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Let us be eternally vigilant, so that we may prevent situations such as the World Trade Center, Mount Carmel, and People's Temple from ever happening again. Well, that's chapter 14 and 50, ladies and gentlemen. I do have a couple more pages to read, and this is very important because this is the sum up of the book. 14 or 15 gives you an idea of what do I want to say? The situation, the issues surrounding mind control. It talks to you about how to deal with others, how to talk with others. But this final chapter is going to be looking more at the philosophical or the, let's see, maybe, philosophical could be good. As a Christian, I would say doctrine versus dogma. In John 8:39, it says, "Search the Scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life, and they are they which testify of me." And a quote that I have made, "Christians do not want their belief in God confused or contradicted by the facts of Scripture." I'd like to start this with a joke you may have heard. A woman would cook a roast using her grandmother's recipe for the roast. Part of the process was that she would cut the end off the roast. The flavorful roast was a family favorite. One day the husband was watching his wife prepare the roast and decided to ask her a question. "Honey, why do you always cut off the end of the roast?" he asked. "I don't know," she replied. "My mom used to do it, and I picked it up from her. The next time we see her, we're going to have to ask." A couple of weeks later, they were at her mother's, and they asked this question. Her mom thought about it for a while and decided she did not know. She told the couple that they were going to have to ask Grandma, since the recipe was hers, and for as long as she remembered, the end had been cut off the roast. A week later, the couple was at her grandma's house, and the woman asked her grandmother why she cut the ends off the roast before she cooked it. Her grandmother looked at her and replied, "Well, dear, it's because the pan was too small for the roast." With this example, we may be able to see the problem with Christianity. Or for that matter, any other faith. Jesus was well aware of this.